think a lot of people ask me like if I was going to do the Doctor Evil voice, and it's funny because you have Mike Myers, Dina Carvey, like all the cats like have their own Lorne impression, and it's not what he really sounds like. It's like a caricature. It's a bobblehead. Like you meet him in person, you watch interviews of him now. It's like he just doesn't sound like that. So it is that was very. I find that I remind people of that a lot, but yeah, I just wanted to get his accent and the kind of like cadence and certain things. But even then, Jason still would come up to me and tone it down and say, "Hey, like I still want more of you in this," and that was really fun and liberating too, because it was like, "Oh man, did I do the voice of that scene?" So it's like it,
That's
it
awesome.
allowed you to be really present.
Gabriel, how's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing so well. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. You're so damn good in this movie, and I'm so glad that we
Huh.
got to watch it at TIFF because seeing a movie like this with an audience like that just was right. It felt right to be there for that.
People really love it. It's fun to be in an audience.
It really is. Like I'm a fellow Canadian. It's great to talk to a fellow Canadian about playing a Canadian as well too. So there's just a lot of Canada involved
Yeah,
in the history
yeah.
of SNL, right?
Oh my God, yeah. Dan Aykroyd, who's from Toronto, Lorne is from Toronto, Gil Radner, he did improv in Toronto for a really long time. Yeah, and Jason's Canadian, and it's premiered at TIFF. It was great.
Yeah, it was just meant to be everything aligned, and I just love to know, like right out the gate, SNL has such deep connections to Canada, like we were just saying, Lorne Michaels, Dan Aykroyd, Martin Short, Mike Myers, like Norm Macdonald's. What do you think it is about Canadians that make us, the funniest people out there?
I think about that, and I think there I think there's a concept of being an outsider, of like, oh, of separation, and I think that allows you to satirize something, and I think any group of minority breeds very funny people. But then again, like, in America, if you hear that like, oh, this Canadian or this actor is American, then you like don't think anything of it. But if they're Canadian, it's like you take notice of it. So I don't know if there's something that just if it's because Canadians are funny or the funniest Canadians move to America. But I'm sure it's all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it is. It's so funny because like you're so right. Like whenever you hear somebody's Canadian, like any Canadian will be like, we champion them. You know what I mean? So it's like we
Yes,
always take them with
exactly.
us. That's why it's been so amazing seeing you and your rise right now because you've just been doing such incredible roles. And I just love to know what was that first conversation like with Jason Reitman about this film? What did you think of the script when you first read it, and where was your mindset going into telling this story?
I first heard about this in January of 23. I was in London for a UK premiere of the Fabelmans, and Jason was at one of the after parties, and we met, and he was a very nice guy. And then I hear that he wants to get coffee with me one of those mornings, and so we do. We meet, we hang out like 2 hours. It was great. We totally got along. Shooting the shit, getting to know each other, hearing each other's like life stories. And then he goes, he was in London they were shooting Ghostbusters, and he goes, I'm working. My next thing is I'm just trying to meet young actors for this thing about SNL. And he told me the story and told me the inspiration and how he made it, but not who he was thinking of me for, just that he wanted to meet as many young actors as he could. And I was like, okay, great. And then he goes, "What are you doing tonight? Do you want to go to a movie with my daughter and my girlfriend?" I'm like, "Yeah." And there is this, I forget the name of the theater, but it's in Soho, London. There's this really cool theater that plays old film prints of classic movies, and American Psycho is playing. And so I get to the theater and I meet him, his daughter, his girlfriend, and then um and then Eric Spielberg was there, Erica was there, Jason Blumenfeld was there, and like his whole production family was there. And I thought, this is suspicious. I didn't know they were going to be there. And then we all got drinks after, and then they're all asking me questions. And I remember thinking in the moment, like, I think he's really considering me for something. And it wasn't until like June that they asked me to audition, and I was able to read the script and find out that they want me to play Lorne. So it took a minute, but yeah, it was in London when I first heard about it.
That's amazing. So it was almost like it was like they were testing you a little bit just to see like let's feel this guy's vibe out. You know what I mean?
It seemed like it. That's exactly. And then talking to Jason later, he says, "Oh no, that's exactly what we were doing."
That's so good. I'm just curious, like, had you like up to that point, like, had you ever met Lorne Michaels before? Like, have you met him since like playing him in this movie?
Our first 2 days of shooting were outside of 30 Rockefeller Center in New York. We were shooting at the ice rink. We were shooting in front of the front doors. But the day before shooting, Lorne invited us to to the show, and Josh Brolin was hosting, and it was really kind of in it. And he invited a group of the cast, and it was really cool. It was really gracious of him. And so I met him briefly there, and we didn't have too much to, we didn't really talk about the movie, but we kind of there were other people in the room, and there was a general conversation to be had. But no, that was my only time talking to Lauren.
Oh, that's very cool though, because like I feel like whenever Lorne's been around and everybody knows him, so it's interesting whenever you hear people do like impressions of him, and I love that your performance this never felt like you were doing an impression. It felt like this is like when I was watching you, I'm like, oh, this is young Lorne Michaels like doing the story right now, right? Which is
Yeah,
amazing to see.
thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of people ask me like if I was going to do the Doctor Evil voice, and it's funny because you have Mike Myers, Dina Carvey, like all the cats like have their own Lorne impression, and it's not what he really sounds like. It's like a caricature. It's a bobblehead. Like you meet him in person, you watch interviews of him now. It's like he just doesn't sound like that. So it's it is that was very. I find that I remind people of that a lot, but yeah, I just wanted to get his accent and the kind of like cadence and certain things. But even then, Jason still would come up to me and tone it down and say, "Hey, like I still want more of you in this," and that was really fun and liberating too, because it was like, "Oh man, did I do the voice of that scene?" So it's like it, it
That's awesome.
allowed you to be really present
That's
and
awesome.
not in your head of like, I have to get the voice and the mannerisms and I have to do this checklist for the scene. It just allowed you to be loose and free and play everything by ear.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned about not being in your head because I think Lorne in this movie, there's so much emotion constantly on his face, and you are somebody who has the world on your shoulders constantly. I'm thinking about that shot in the trailer into the film where, you just put your arm on, the camera
Um,
crane and your eyes, you're just like, you just tell that this man has a million thoughts in his head right now. What goes into making that scene and feeling those emotions? Because like I felt stressed watching you in this.
in that specific scene.
I mean, throughout the entire movie, I'll be honest with you, but that specific scene, I think it's one of my favorite scenes in the film because you just look like a
Oh,
man
thank
who's
you.
just carrying everything on you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean that was definitely a make or break moment for the whole film and also specifically for Lauren. But yeah, I think what was so great about that set is because Jason just demands such calmness and tranquility and positivity on that set. Like it was never that feeling of was never inflicted upon me. That was only, like yeah, I didn't draw from my actual environment to get that nervous. And we had 10-hour days, so we'd be done at 6:30 every day, and I could sleep and get a full night's sleep, which doesn't ever really happen on film sets. And I'd get home and I'd like really stop thinking about the film, which I've never done before. And I was very much like there was such an emphasis on being as present as possible and not showing up with a million things prepared and really showing up and understanding the context of the scene and certain beats that you have to hit, but every like you don't know what choreography Jason's gonna have you do. You don't know how if this is gonna be a 7-minute take or like a 2-second thing. So you'd really just show up, see what you're about to do, and then be present with it. And that allowed a spontaneity and a mental, I think, just like I don't know. I felt abundant with it. I never felt exhausted, really. And I always felt like I was fresh rather than like making myself go insane with how stressed Lorne needed to be.
Yeah, that's great. It's nice to know that like the vibe on set was great, because one of the things that like when you're seeing the sets, and then I was watching some of the, like the B-roll and the behind the scenes of this being made, it felt like that must have been one of the coolest sets to be on, because every direction looked like there was just like, and you've seen in the film, there's a story being told in every single direction. So what was it like with this, the caliber cast that you had with you? Like what was that feeling like on set for you, where you're just like, we're recreating history right now?
It felt like we were doing like a summer camp Shakespeare play where where everyone's great friends, everyone's just constantly being hilarious, having the best time. And you're all dressed up as these famous characters that everyone's familiar with, but these are our interpretations of them. It felt like, we were throwing a lot of Midsummer's Night Dream or something, and like a story that everyone knows. Because I'm such a huge comedy nerd, and I love watching interviews of my favorite actors and comedians and what inspired them and how they got started and blah blah blah. And so much of it gets drawn back to this like genesis that happened in 1975 because of SNL and all the people involved. And so this era has always been like mythologized to me. I've always looked back on it with like such wonder and like, man, what would it have been like to see John Belushi do a bunch of coke? and so like getting to go back to that and feel a part of it really felt like it was just the most fun for me and everyone there.
Yeah, it looked incredible, and I'm just curious because you mentioned you're such a big comedy nerd. Like, do you have a favorite, either SNL class or even SNL cast member from any of the years that you've always kind of looked to, and like they always like have a direct line to like to me making me laugh. Like for myself, like whenever I think of like obviously like the Lonely Island years or like Bill Hader, people like
Yeah.
that, right? It's like instant, like I know whatever they've done since then I'm going to love, just because you love them as actors and performers. So who are those members for you?
I think for me, it's, yeah, like Bill Hader, Fred Armisen, Kristen Wiig, Maya Rudolph, Andy Samberg, Jason Sudeikis, Will Forte, like the Bobby Moynihan, like that cast was who I like grew up with and watched, and so they still consistently, whether it's a clip on YouTube or a whole episode, I will go back on like just make me laugh uncontrollably. But then again, like Norm Macdonald's Weekend Update or Chris Farley or Will Ferrell, like those guys, um, those guys are the most consistent, like laugh out loud hilarious for me.
Yeah, they're hilarious. It's funny you mentioned Bobby Moynihan. We spoke to him a couple weeks ago, and we had 5 minutes with him. But I don't even think we got a question out because we were just laughing the entire time with him. So it's just like those are the people like, oh, I'm so glad you live up to
Yeah,
what I was hoping you would be.
no, exactly. And I've met Bobby Moynihan a couple times because I'm friends with Dan Black, who runs the Ultimate Improv Show in Los Angeles. It's the best improv you could find, I think, ever. And Bobby Moynihan is a regular guest on, or like not guest, but like he's a part of the show, the improv show a lot. And so I've met him, and he's just always drop dead hysterical on those shows. And it's just, yeah, really, really sweet guy too.
That's amazing. I have to ask you just because it's funny that it was also at TIFF when we saw the Fabelmans here on the show. That's just a movie that stuck with us and I think about constantly. And I rewatched it again last night, knowing that we were going to be talking to you today. I'm just curious for yourself. You get to work with Steven Spielberg. What have you taken from working with him on the Fabelmans that you've now brought with you to every single set that you've worked on since?
Steven works so fast and efficiently that you feel like not shame because it's not inflicted upon you, but you feel a guilt if you're taking too long to get any work. And so there's this emphasis on like show up ready, show up prepared. And I think also like I felt like I had to grow up really fast on that set just because you're surrounded by these masters who've been doing it for two, three times the length of your lifespan at the time, and they've seen it all, and you have to keep up with them, and no one's gonna like, hey, are you okay? Show up and perform. And um, I learned so much. I was able, I mean, that opportunity, that script, I mean, that's so much for a character to do that not a lot of young actors get the opportunity to do. And I'm very grateful for that. And I learned a lot. And also, I learned how to manage my energy and when too much prep is, destructive, and when you have to decompress and let yourself rest and sleep. And I just learned so much about the Ravens. I just learned so much about myself and how to make a film and about acting that I think I'm going to carry with me for the rest of my life, but all incredibly positive lessons that I think, most people take years to learn, and I was able to learn them all in 3 months. It's the greatest education I think a young actor could ever get.
Gabriel, I'm so grateful for your time, and it's amazing that you've gone to play a fictionalized version of Spielberg, and you played revolutionizing movies, revolutionizing TV with Lorne Michaels. So I cannot wait to see what you get to work on next. So I'm really excited for that.
Thank you very much. This was a great interview.